make copies. So we can develop an old service.
Good morning, Charlie.
Jerry, how are you?
That's fine. I got over it.
Is that yours still right?
Good. Whatever it was.
Whatever it was.
I want to bond with you, because it's either you like a fan or you don't like a fan. There's not much in between.
Before I got my hearing aids, that would have been an issue. Now I'm good. Life is good now.
Good.
Good morning.
Charlie, good morning.
Lisa, how are you?
Good.
Well, now we're going to have to go around the table and define what good is. If everybody's good, I want to know what that
It's
is.
a relative term.
Yeah.
It's Friday.
I would say it's
Did you ask anybody to set up the projector?
Guy that used to come to substance abuse
Are
meetings,
you
so while
gonna
I'm
use the
still on the
projector?
green side of the grass.
Are you gonna use the projector? I've decided, I'm
I
gonna
don't
use the
think we really
projector.
need it, to be honest.
Okay.
If Bill's
So I'll
don't
shut
have
my
to
computer down.
pay for copy. I don't. I'm not a big.
I was looking forward to it, Steve.
Oh, I like to walk around with my pointer.
Oh, thank you.
You know,
Is that it? You need
with
one?
my, who's that inspirational
Jerry,
speaker?
Jerry got one.
No. No, I don't got one.
So we'll leave that, okay.
Like it or not, I'm it, I believe.
You're it.
Well.
I'm Jerry.
You're very
Jerry's
special.
fine. How you? Thank you.
Is Mr. Romack having to join us?
He may, but he's not been coming.
I think Brian came late. I think he may have come a little late, but I think he came in. Well, this may be
Might have got
pretty
a better
short,
offer.
Chuck.
We'll go get coffee.
If he is, we'll just go with him.
I-
Oh, there he is. He is coming in.
I should probably sit down there, Jerry, so you don't have to videotape the back of my head for.
I need something to bounce the light off.
Do ya? Yeah, you guys love me too.
Back of my head is the better side.
Yeah. That's what I said if I was a little bit smarter.
Chuck appreciates that. He gives him more room there.
That's right, you get the full profile
Yeah.
view of Chuck. He's the money man anyway.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The real deal, I'm just a
Real
suit-
deal, huh?
Suit. Are we,
I probably inherited you starting this meeting, but no other members will be here today.
that's it, huh?
I'm it.
Correct.
It's either me or nothing today.
Well, things are gonna sound pretty familiar from the other day.
Well, they are. But
Um,
we can take a few minutes and just go over it, I guess.
Mhm.
I'm fine with the agenda. The approval of the minutes, so we'll have to bring them next month. Back to the board next month. And the next item is the 12-13 year-end update.
Yeah, and on the year-end update, I'm gonna,
Before we get started, what's Ms. Swartz got to do?
I just talked to Herc. He was downstairs getting a complete chest X-ray. He is out of intensive care. And Chuck, she was so touched by your email. She thought that was so kind of you to have thought about her. So I'm sure if she's not thanked you, she will, but she wanted me to thank you. He stabilized and still haven't, now they're really monitoring his heart and his oxygen the most right now, and trying to figure out what's really going on with his lungs. So he is not, he's dropped down out of intensive care. He's had a fever they can't quite figure out. So we had heard yesterday, before the fever started, that he might get to go home this weekend, which would have been a true
Really?
miracle with where he was last Friday, if you think about that. But I think some of that's changed now, but slow, but recovery. So thank you for asking.
No, it actually doesn't sound that slow to me.
No, in a week.
Pretty good progress.
Yeah.
What
so-
about his arm?
Oh, you know, I'm so sorry. I had not asked her about his arm. I'm so sorry. She's not saying anything about. You know what? He stood up for 1 minute today. The physical therapist came in and counted 60 seconds, and he was able to stand up, and then truly had to lay down. But it was the first time he had stood up since it all happened. So that was a big milestone today.
Well, please, I'll give it back to you.
Okay. I'm gonna hand this out. Could you hand Jerry one too? This was not in the packet, and just want to go over.
I was talking to Steve.
Okay,
He knew.
good, perfect. Everybody got one? Okay. We talked a little bit, Chuck, Monday about why we weren't going to present the year-end financial statements yet, and the importance of having as close as we can, a good estimation for the claims that we think are still outstanding that haven't been paid or booked as an expense. So what I want to do is kind of just go through this little PowerPoint, which I think gives a good visual and will help give everybody an understanding of why this has taken a little bit of time and some of the things we're running into. And again, we just want to make sure we can get as much data as we can and appropriately do the research and the analysis on it before we make this final estimation for year-end. So first I want to talk about authorization trends and some of the things that are happening that are impacting this estimation. And one of the things I think that's easy to do to make it more understandable is contrast what's happening at Western Highlands with Smoky, because it just gives a different perspective and a different way of making, I think it makes it a little more clear to contrast it to something else. So if we just start with the authorizations, and I'm on the second page, and I can see right off it'll be good that in the future that we number these, so it's one thing I'll put in my mind for future, but I'm on the one that says authorization trends. And that first bullet about the Western Highlands data is, and the one example we're going to be using through here is behavioral health long-term residential. So typically, when you authorize that, it's authorized for a residential day, and that's normally authorizations that are used at 100%. If you place an individual there and you authorize 6 months, they're probably there for 6 months. They could discharge early, but typically 100% of those days would get claimed to the MCO for payment. So we're going to see on this next slide, there are a lot of outstanding authorizations still for behavioral health long-term. At Smoky, when we look at this data for the same time period, the amount of authorizations that have been approved for service, the majority of those have been used. It's a much higher percentage, and then there's typically a second step because we're basing the IBNR on authorization for certain services that you expect 100% utilization, like PRTF and inpatient and residential and ICFMR. So an extra step that you can take is to ensure that when a consumer or an individual discharges early, we go in and update that authorization so we know we only have that certain time period of a commitment. And that way you can estimate your expense a lot closer when you're doing it.
So that happens at Smoky, but not at Western Highlands.
Right, and I don't believe we started doing that in the first few months, and then it was like, oh my God, we have all this out here, we don't know if it's valid. And it's usually a small number of consumers that are in like PRTF and ICFMR, and it's easy to follow up and say, and to find out, no, they discharged early, we don't have to have this financial commitment. So, again, that's just the difference in the way, and I'm not being judgmental or saying either one's right or wrong, it's just a way to get a closer estimation. So if you look at the next slide that says authorization trends examples, what we're doing is comparing where we are with paid claims and authorizations for one category of service, behavioral health long-term residential, And it has residential 2, residential 3, and I believe it's mainly all for children. I'm pretty sure that category is all children's services, or that's my recollection right now. The months across the top, July 12, August 12, those are the dates of service or when the service was provided, regardless of when the claim was sent to Western Highlands or to Smoky. So the top section is Western Highlands. So if you look at July 12, paid claims for dates of service July 12, $437,895 has been paid. The authorizations that are out there are $777,621. So there's a difference in authorizations than paid claims. If you look at the same month for Smoky, Smoky paid $666,527, and our authorizations are $680,202. That doesn't mean that's all we originally authorized, but we've gone back and gotten information to say that's all that should be claimed. So if you just go by month, this is a 6-month total, you can see at the top on the third line for Western Highlands, there's still $1.7 million in authorizations for behavioral health long-term. What we're trying to do is go back and validate and say, are those really going to be claims that are coming in? How much of that do we need to estimate will still be paid? Because it's out now outside of the 90 days and the 90-day follow-up.
Right.
However, as you'll see in another slide, we're still paying claims from here that go back to January 12. So we can't get a good feel yet for how much of that potentially is a true liability. And that's why it's taken us a while to get down to this final estimation. We're just trying to get as close as we can and understand all these trends and unknowns and what's really happening so we can have a solid estimation. And it is an estimation, it's not going to be exact, but we need to get as close as we can before we close the books.
Now, as your CEO, Chuck, what I would do is stop right here and say what you should, the takeaway from this is that something's wrong. Okay? And the figuring out of what's wrong, is where we are.
And I was going to ask Lisa, the authorizations, like the ones in July, the 777,000. Am I correct in understanding that these are authorizations that are still in the system, active? These are active authorizations. In other words, they're
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
So that's the real key. So there are other issues, but they are So if someone did submit a claim against that, there is an expectation that we would pay it.
Yes.
I believe. Okay.
Yes.
So I just wanted to
And-
clarify because that's why this is so important.
Right.
Yeah.
Because at some point, the authorization ends. And that's the point we're getting to. So you've already gone through and expired, turned any authorizations that should be over because of the time.
Not in Western Highlands.
So, okay.
That's what we're working on.
See,
doing
okay,
now.
that's
there's-
the operational issue.
See,
There's some dead wood in there.
yeah, that's what we're just trying to validate.
Take that personal.
We could have final payments or final paid claims that should clear up some of those authorizations if they'd have been adjusted back. That was
Right, see, if we just go back to July, the total authorizations are the 777,000. So we've gotten claims in against those of 437. So what's open as an active authorization is 339,
Okay.
okay?
of which they could actually should be closed out already. Some of them could be closed out
Right,
already.
right. And, typically, again, you'd have 90 days to bill, and then you'd have 90 days from the date of your denial to work with the claim staff if there are billing issues and errors to get them cleaned up. And then after that, you would have a formal appeal process to say, I think you denied this inappropriately and we want you to reconsider. I'm not certain of the appeal process at Western Highlands yet. There's what's called a CRI, Claims Resolution Inquiry, that they're sending in, providers are sending in for the claim staff to go back and do this research. Those are actually going all the way back right now to January 12. And part of the reason is when the system was first implemented, some rates were wrong, things were not paid correctly, so they're going back and making corrections. That's one thing. And then what we're trying to do is get a handle on why are we going back and paying things that old if it's not just corrections? Because there's gotta be a formal appeal process outside of the claims staff. Usually it's independent of the claims department. They're not part of it at all, except to provide factual information on what occurred. So this independent body, usually made up of, like, we've got QM, network, finance. It's an independent group internally that would say, no, we followed our rules, we followed this was an appropriate denial.
So you're gonna have to start with the authorizations and work backwards.
Yes, we are in 4 categories of service where we use the authorization to do the estimation, and they're all residential services, because they're easy to do. You know, they were there, they weren't there, it's a flat rate. And
Right.
so we're in the process of asking the UN staff here at Western Highlands. What we typically have done is we make phone calls to the provider, we look at medical record documentation, you can tell when it ended, we'll get that information, and then we'll make adjustments to the authorization so we can do a close estimation. Because when you look at this, there's still over 40% of the total authorizations for this category outstanding. And at Smoky, we've gotten it down to less than 4% by just doing these extra steps to make sure we know.
But just to be really concrete here, so looking at July 12, we would, as of, say, October, we would no longer be allowing a claim for a service in July, right?
Typically, you would not. That's
Okay.
correct.
Now, but in the processing of a claim, the IT system or the staff may not have done everything correctly. So if Western Highlands processed something incorrectly, that's what we're checking to make sure that we don't owe them or they don't owe us, where we get to the right amount and that all gets settled and finished. So the process is going month by month to double check that the claims were paid properly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the volume of the claims resolution requests have been previously, but I know since April or May, it's been huge. And I think it's probably the announcement of the
Just
presentation.
absolutely.
And I think it's on one of these next slides. It's on the next slide, where again, it's just saying that Western Highlands is still paying claims from January 12, and it could be cleanup, it could be a number of reasons. But this next bullet, 2.1 million has been paid out in the last 90 days for dates of service outside of 180 days. And that's all cleanup, all inquiries where things have been denied, maybe they shouldn't have been. You know, it's different system issues that are still being addressed. I mean, it's just a number of reasons. That's why, and they're processing the CRIs as quickly as they can. What we've asked for through Steve and to have the claim staff is to list them when they receive them, what's the amount in question, the service, so we can try to get our hands around what's the volume of this that's coming in, still outstanding, and how quickly can we clean it up. Because they're very focused on cleaning it up. I mean, there's a concentrated effort to get this cleaned up, but they're just coming in.
It is an avalanche, but the highest exposure, just to kind of get to your concrete point, would be a claim that was denied, that was in fact valid. And therefore, we will be reprocessing it. If we determine that it should be paid, we will be paying it. So if you go back to the July 12th, you get, the exposure is $339,000 for that month, potentially. So from the most conservative position, that's what you'd have to book as a liability. Now, how much of that is real is because we didn't do the things that Lisa is talking about. We're not sure. But I can tell you, the staff are daily. That's a big part of the work that they're doing, is taking these older claims, re-looking at them, rerunning them through the system, and if it's valid, they're paying them. Okay, so that's where we're at.
Yeah, and I think if it's been an error in processing, we've got to clean them up. If it hasn't, and they're outside of what I would consider a normal time frame to request reconsideration, I think we need to make the decision that we're not going to consider them. I think that's something we probably need to talk about and make a proposal. Again, I think if it's been a processing error for whatever reason, we need to fix it, regardless of whether we overpaid or underpaid. But if it's just somebody's waited a year to ask, oh, I don't, I want you to reconsider this, I don't know that we should, so.
How flexible, and you may or may not know this, Charlie, but how flexible were you on payment of claims outside of the 90 days?
Well, my understanding, which may not be deep, was that we were erring in the direction of paying because the system wasn't working very well. So we erred in the direction of making sure a provider got paid rather than the other way.
And it gets hard to filter out what is a system issue versus a, well, I just haven't gotten around to billing this yet.
Yeah. We deal with that too, Brian and Smokey, where even if it's a system issue, usually the claim gets in there, it usually gets
Yeah.
denied, so you
Right.
have that tracking of that
Right.
first date of denial, so we can pretty well track it, I think probably Steve and I, and he may have already done it, is talk to the claim staff here and review some of the CRIs and just make
Mhm.
sure they're applying timeframes and things in the manner that maybe need to be in. There's no reason that I think they're not, but just ensure that they are.
So Chuck, what we're saying is that if and this is something that you stay up on, and you can then tell if it's a problem related to some system issue or something, you can identify it because it's very current. We see it, we talk to the provider about it, but when you get this big pile like this, it's kind of like, wow. How do you sort all of that out becomes a lot bigger leap of faith, I think is what we're gonna get into.
Yeah, I could see that, when you look at $777,000 worth of authorizations, and you gotta reconstruct each one of them to see where you're at. Agreed.
I'm just gonna turn,
Understand.
oh, sorry,
You
Judge.
go ahead.
I'm just gonna turn to the next slide, it's got this little graph on it. And again, we're just trying to compare and contrast with the Smoky timeframe. So this is the amount paid for services provided between July 12 and December 12 that got paid in April 13, May 13, or June 13. Okay. So, and again, it's just showing the lag of the claims and how long it's taking them to get paid or processed. So Smoky paid a little less than $400,000 for services again provided for that 6-month period, and they were paid again April through June of 2013. And if you compare that to Western Highlands, over here we paid almost $1.2 million. So you can tell there's a big difference in the volume that's being paid. So of that $2.1 million that just came in on those claims inquiries that got paid in the last 90 days, $1.2 million was for July through December. The rest of it was probably prior to that, so almost $900,000 paid prior to July 12. Pretty sure. So that's kind of, again, we just got to make sure of what's outstanding that we're going to end up having to pay so we can estimate it as accurately as we can. So, okay. Here's one other complicating factor about estimating the IBNR. The methodology that's used by Western Highlands is done more at the overall service level and not by category of service. And it's being done by taking an average of the claims paid daily. So, and I think it ends up being about $350,000 a day, and that's used to factor in what's still outstanding to pay. What happens when you get that average? When you just paid $2.1 million that's that old, it's never in the average to start with, so you're underestimating your future liability. So I think what's been estimated is probably underestimated at this point. And again, that's why we're just trying to take our time and get all the data before we do this. Because if you're using that average and you haven't paid everything you should have already paid, your average is under what it
Understated.
should be.
Right.
Okay?
And the reverse could be true too. If you start to pick up the backlog, your averages will go up. It may be overstated potentially. So it's just it's a catch-22 once you start catching up, which is obviously April, May, and June have been heavy months of catch-up, trying to catch up, which is, the staffing that's in the business office.
And we have all the paid claims data now from Western Highlands. We have it in the cost triangles, but when you start looking at it because of these authorizations and other things, we just aren't ready to finalize it and make the projection. We just got a little more legwork to do before we can get there. The last page has just got a couple other barriers that doing the data analysis, we've got a little more research to do. Mapping issues, what that means is you take all your services and you crosswalk them to one of the service categories. Because while we may have 13 or 14 service categories, we literally have thousands of service codes. So you're mapping your service codes to a category and you're mapping your authorizations. It appears that on some of the services, they may not be mapped the same way the authorizations are. And that was highlighted in one category where the paid claims exceed the number of authorizations. So you know that's a red flag. It's not anything to do with unmanaged visits. So we're just going back and making sure things are mapped correctly, again, so we can do the estimation correctly. We're also trying to understand and estimate on the outpatient. I think there are a lot of outpatient services bundled into one authorization. And I think then there are some multiple authorizations for those services so they can get the service billed and paid. So we're just kind of trying to break that down so we can get a good estimation on the
Yeah,
outpatient.
there's a couple of ways those things got bundled that would artificially inflate the authorization.
Yeah, so we're just trying to make sure when we look at that, we know what we can strip out, again, so we get as close as we can. And then in reconciling the amount of paid claims to the reports, there's some very just minor differences that we're still just seeing if we can resolve rather easily, to again, get the estimation correct. So I think it's just going to be a couple more weeks where we are comfortable in saying, here's what it is, this is as close as we think we can get it, and then we'll close the financials and bring some year-end statements.
Lisa, just one other piece of information that I've heard that I could go on that last page. I believe this is correct, that there was a practice of having duplicate and sometimes triplicate authorizations for the same service because they were different locations. And so there would be 3 authorizations out and the provider could pick which one of them they used. The intent was not to use all 3,
Right.
to use one of the 3, but that would also be a artificially overstating authorization. So
That's what Charlie was just.
some do double or triple in some cases, so that's just another factor that could bring the number down.
That's what Charlie was referring to on the outpatient where they're done in triplicate, and that's where we're just trying to evaluate those and make sure we don't count all 3 of them, but it is that same issue, Steve, that you're talking about. Is there anything else on the IDNR estimation? Anything, Chuck, from you, comments or anything? You good?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
I know, like to read it.
Okay. Is it okay if I go to the next one?
Three-way hospital inpatient payments.
Yeah, on the 3-way hospital payments, Western Highlands has 3-way hospital contracts. It's Mission, Pardee, and Rutherford. And it's a contract between 3 parties, Western Highlands, the hospital, and the Division of Mental Health. And the way they've been set up since the inception is that the hospitals bill the area authority or the MCO, and then we bill it upstream to the state, and then the state takes whatever time they need to pay it, and then when we get paid, we pay the hospital. And that literally may take
More than 2 days.
more than 2 days. and less than 365. No, it's not quite that long, but literally, they may pay in 60 days, 90 days, 120. It's however they want to manage their cash at the state level.
I remember one payment that came in was about 6 months old.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of outcry statewide, especially from the Hospital Association, about the fact that they can't get paid timely for 3-day beds. And a lot of MCOs changed their practice to start paying before they got paid. The state also opened it up, and it may have even been one of the Senate bills or something, I don't recall. But anyway, it was changed where hospitals, if they weren't paid within 60 days from submission of a claim, they could complain to DMH and start getting paid from DMH. So and what that does, it adds another level of reconciliation and settlement that's already difficult to do. It now adds another one with the state, because now they're going to be paying things that we're authorizing, and we don't know when they've paid or we've paid, and somebody gets retroactive Medicaid, and it is really just hard to determine where you are. So we made a policy decision change at Western Highlands last week to start paying the 3-way claims when they are received at Western Highlands. We are going to go back and pay all those that are outstanding right now for which Western Highlands has not been paid. And in talking with the division, I know they have a $225,000 they're getting ready to release for a lot of those back claims. But we're going to go ahead and pay them. And the claim staff are researching now to make sure they know who to pay. It just happens to be the day I called Kent Woodson at the division to tell him he had what he described as a huge stack of claims for remission requesting payment straight from the division. So they have already gone to the division to say we want to be paid directly.
So the division has the money to pay them, but they don't have the money to pay us.
Well, I wouldn't put it
I
that way.
know, I don't think they will either. And that, on the finance officer's call, we said, well, if you would just pay us, we would pay it. It wouldn't be an issue. How can you pay them when you aren't paying us? But you're right. I don't think they would pay any sooner. But it appeased everybody, I guess. I don't know. So Mission has done that. And I called Kent and I was telling him we were getting ready to change this, that Western Highlands had not been paying. And he said, oh, I know, I just got this stack from Mission. And I said, well, we'd like to just start paying them here. So he's written Mission back and said, no, the state's not going to pay them directly, that Western Highlands will, and we've changed the policy. So it's just, for everybody's information, that's what's going to start happening. And the claim staff are going back and making sure.
They're pulling them out in the last 2-3 days and lining everything up.
I mean, it's just a system designed to piss off the maximum number of people. It's just-
Right. So, I guess one thing I haven't thought about we need to do internally, and I can get with, Dawn and others, is us do an official communication to the hospital that we made this change. And I haven't done that piece yet. Mission knows only because the division told them, but we do need to tell the other ones, so.
Well, that'll make them happy, assuming we pay promptly.
And there's really no reason we should not. It should go, I know, but it really, yes, it should go through the regular check write cycle. And I think that's something that we need to monitor to make sure we know which ones were received and when they got paid and if there are any outstanding for whatever reason. So that will be a positive change for the hospitals and hopefully some goodwill on their end.
Yeah. The other part of that is when somebody retroactively receives Medicaid and somebody has to be moved from a 3-way payment to a Medicaid payment, the research for that is kind of extensive because we have to ask for their medical record and they send us the entire medical record, not just for that hospital stay. They send us this whole thing, which may be hundreds of pages, and we have to sort through that to find this particular episode and then look at medicals, all that stuff. So that piece of it is delays sometimes the payment for the retroactive.
And we probably need to talk about that internally here, Steve, how that's handled. And I think right now what happens is the process you just described, and then the claim staff would put it against Medicaid once it's authorized by UM or whatever.
Right.
I think at Smoky, we recoup it and notify them they have to rebill Medicaid, so they're responsible for resubmitting. And I don't know if we want to change that internally, but I think we just need to talk about whatever process.
Well,
we
if
do.
you can come up with a better system, that would be good.
Yeah, and I know starting October 1st, that would be their way they will have to do it, so I don't know if we want to change it, but we can figure that out
But
internally.
they're already doing that for you guys.
They are. However, we don't contract with those 3 hospitals for 3-way. But that's the way we do all the Medicaid retroactive eligibility.
Uh-huh.
We don't just automatically roll it to
Okay.
Medicaid, they have to resubmit the claim.
That's how you're doing it with CAN,
We are.
and that's going smoothly, and they're not.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay,
But-
never mind.
There's other issues there.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue because they're having to do all their Medicaid services that way, all providers. And it's no different than we had to do it with Medicaid typically. Well, sometimes they rolled it over. That was probably too broad a statement. But let's just talk about it internally and see if we can figure out a better way to do it. Okay, so,
Move on to number 6.
yes. There was just a handout in there, item 2, and it was really just to kind of give an update on the volume of Medicaid claims that are being processed. And this is what was processed in June, not dates of service June, but what was processed. Takes 8 days, which is the average time to process a clean claim. And there were 82,214 claims billed in June, and those are individual claim lines, and 71,000 of them approved. So when you think about these CRIs and follow-ups from providers, there's 10,000, really when you count the claims not processed due to system issues, over 11,000 claims that got denied. And that's a lot of work to do to clean up claims for the claim staff. And some of the processes are manual and pretty intensive, so just giving you an idea of why it does take quite a bit of time to go back and clean this up. And most of these, you can see, are provider claims
Yeah,
processing
that's
issues,
provider.
not system issues. They're provider issues based on this report. So, yeah. And also just the number of eligibles, consumers, individuals that were eligible for Medicaid service in June was 69,837. So again, just to give you an idea of number of consumers or individuals eligible and the number of claims processed. Again, this is just Medicaid, not state funded at all.
What's our number of Medicaid eligibles on the Smoky side now?
We're averaging right at 78,000. You know, this is pretty low, really. I mean, when they,
Yeah.
you know, they estimate 75,000 is what you gotta have to make it work, and this is the number eligible, you know, Western Highlands. So, anyway, the consolidated entity will have a much better, greater economy of scale, so it will be beneficial to have the higher number. So, that was really all I had for the finance committee, and I think y'all are gonna talk about this memo on the calendar data. I don't know if you wanna do it in here and in there, or
Do it in here,
you wanna do
do it
it?
in there both.
Steve, you wanna do it since you and Brian were and Charlie, I guess, were instrumental in getting this passed on me?
Well, it's pretty short and sweet. You have you have a copy of
Yes,
it?
sir.
Yeah. So this is, I think I had mentioned last time we were waiting for something in writing back from the division that would codify what we had verbally agreed to when we went to Raleigh. So this is it. So Western Highlands the DMA is requesting that for Medicaid data, that Western Highlands will send in the data on an Excel file, and that we're going to use a format in that file that was similar, or if not identical, to what we have referred to in the past as the Mercer file that was submitted to the state in June 7th. It was a deadline that we hit. And that's what we proposed, since we had already created the methodology to pull the data out and put it into that format. And we knew at that time that we were within a very close, we were not right on the number, but I think that the file was 151 million in claims at that time, and we were able to detail 150 million of it. So we knew what the other million was, but it was bad data. So that's what we propose, and they are accepting that. Then they also requested that we submit encounter data to NC Tracks. And then the third sentence, which is important, is that we're not at this time, we are not requesting significant work to be done to these claims to ensure that they pass the encounter edits and audits. So, in short, that the methodology, the process of getting this data out and to them, we've already started that process where we have done the initial testing of that process, and we will operationalize that within the next few weeks. So by this meeting next month, we should have done it, at least the first month. So we are on track. Programming is already in work to get this to work exactly. And just in short, the methodology is quite simple in concept, hard in execution, but we are going to start with paid claims data from the general ledger. So back to the finances, because we know what we paid. And then we're going to pull out every one of those claims that ties to what was paid. We're going to pull those claims out, put them into the Excel file format that's been discussed here. They will be further reviewed to make sure that we can put in as much valid data as possible without crossing any lines. In other words, it's just like bill type and place of service, things like that, that often were not submitted by the providers to Western, but are required in order to get it through the NC Track system. So we're going to do the administrative pieces of cleaning up that data. And then we'll also look at the NPI, the National Provider ID for each of those. And our commitment is not in this letter, but is that at minimum we'll provide them with a billing NPI for that provider. So they will know who we paid. And then that process will directly lead to pulling those claims out of the MIS system and put them into the new compliant NC Tracks 837 format, and we will send it to the state with the Excel file. And our plan at this point is to do 1 month at a time. First, just so we'll figure out so we're going to go back to January of 2012. So the first month will probably be the worst month because of the issues that the system was contending with back at that period of time. But we will go through that. We'll come up with a very repeatable methodology, and then we're just going to start processing. And my estimation, it's early, but I'm hopeful that we could do a month a week. That's my goal. We'll see if we can actually execute it, but if you do the math, that will take several months to do that, even at that pace. So that's what's the operationalizing this is already underway, is what I'm saying, and they have now given us the blessing to go ahead, and we will put it in place and operationalize it as quickly as possible.
So how I would explain this, Chuck, is we're digging out of a really, really big hole.
I remember you telling me what the hole was a couple of months ago. So.
Yeah, we know how to get out of the hole, and the state said that's a good way to get out of the hole.
When I saw your email, I remarked if you had it in your email, I felt like this was the one we've been talking about for the last couple of months, I guess, or a month and a half. So that's good. Anything else you want? We can break and get ready for our board meeting.
Thank you.
You know, and this is something we can just
report.
Kind of replant the seed. I know that, Chuck, board members are, wondering what's our role, what should we do, on the whole closeout stuff that Steve is going to talk about. I think the answer is, well, there's two answers. One is how quickly are we going to merge when all of this just becomes part of the whole? Or what is the interval of reports on all the closeout activities, which it's 98% financial? What's the interval that Western board members would want to hear information about? That makes sense?
Oh, yes, it does. I've been trying to think that scenario through, you know, it's,
It is.
I still see the Western Board probably has to maintain intact until after the financials are approved. So we're looking at probably end of June timeframe, or, and then I guess at that point, when all the assets are transferred over, then when DHHS says, okay, this is the drop dead date for Western Highlands, I guess that's when the board will be dissolved. But I think in the meantime, if we say we enter the merger, say in October, say by the 1st of October, then really the play of the board does not come into play for a while until the financials are done. And I guess we need to figure that we want to transition some of these members over to the full board, transfer the boards, both of them together, and keep them together until such time as we transfer everything out, or till DHHS says, okay, we're satisfied with everything. So this is the ending date for Western Highlands Network, and then at that point, those board members will go to the wayside when we begin to look at the new board. You and I mentioned to you one time maybe the possibility of asking DHHS would they waive the 1.250 figure. Because the last figure that I saw on the catchment area is somewhere around $1,074,000. That could be a little old, but that could be based off the 2010 census too. But it's not that far off from that.
Well, I know what
I would
DHHS
think-
is gonna,
I would think the recommended board by DHHS is not gonna work. I just can't see it working.
well, DHHS is, I know what their answer is gonna be, and it's that they don't have the authority to change the law. So it's gonna be, thanks for asking, but we can't do anything about that. You gotta go over to the General Assembly. I mean, they're the only one that can change the law.
I've gone there before, so
Yeah.
that scared me to go. Better late than never, but most of the stuff that we begin to look at a while ago now. I don't know why it takes so long to do anything down there, but it does.
Okay.